All right. I figured I would do a live here again today. I'm going to keep this one a little bit short, but I had an interesting bunch of conversations here just recently in the last week, and it's been fun talking about consciousness and awareness and us all coping in everyday life. And I thought I would together a little bit today what astrology is kind of showing in what's happening in the world right now and where we're changing to as a society. And I think it's huge. One of the things that we've got going on right now, of course, a lot of people have heard on the news that, ICE is now really ramping up raids in Los Angeles, New York, and I think Chicago, all over the place, actually. But there's been a lot of riots. And now there's this new feud between Trump and Newsom, where basically he's bringing in the National Guard and he's threatening to bring in the Marines. So, I mean, it's really pretty intense in certain areas. And particularly, I believe it was Paramount, California, or Paramount. So a lot of stuff is going on right now. And I've also, again, been talking to a lot of people who talk about, they're very afraid, and some with good cause, of what's happening not only with AI, but what AI can allow future government controllers to do. And right now, whether you like Trump or hate Trump, we're in this transition, I think, of reorientating the way manufacturing and China and the whole global setup is going on here with the Southeast Asia and manufacturing. But we don't have a world anything like what's been in recent past, at least so far as we're told, right? So what's interesting is, where does the astrology fit into this? Well, first and foremost, and I've been mentioning this, we have Mars right now has just ingressed in the sidereal zodiac into Leo. And interesting, this is parallel to exactly when Musk and Trump started going off here. Again, this Mars is transiting Donald Trump's ascendant. And Donald Trump has an interesting chart because he has, in Vedic astrology, what we call a Raj Yoga Mars. And you might say, well, what the heck is that? Well, that's where Mars rules an angle and a trine. And for Donald Trump, it does. And it's in the ascendant in his birth chart. So when transiting Mars comes over, you're seeing all this stuff heat up. And it's really happening right now in a number of ways. Look, they're trying to get this bill passed with the taxes. You got Musk coming back and fighting with him. And there's also a number of other things going on. Look at the rest of the world. I've been mentioning about this Kala Sarpa yoga. You might say, well, what does that mean? Well, again, for anyone not familiar with astrology, all the planets are in between the eclipse points right now, except the moon breaks it every 2 weeks. Now, if you modern astrologers look, you'll say, yeah, but Pluto's out there. And you're right, Pluto is out there. But that's the only one. And that's not an easy planet to have out there anyhow. So what we've got, it's a very dicey time in the world. And I just heard there were secret meetings with Russia, China, and Iran. And they're basically flipping the bird at Trump right now, saying, screw you, we're not going to stop Iran's nuclear program. Well, we know where this is going, right? Israel is not going to tolerate Iran getting a nuclear weapon. And they are probably this close, if not already there. In fact, there's a lot of reports saying they are already enriched enough and probably even have one, or if they don't, they're right on the edge of getting it. So very dicey times. And I think this is going to ramp up even more. Plus, we've got Russia just attacked deep inside of Russia by all the drone strikes. And I do not believe Ukraine has the technical or skill sets to do what they're doing if they weren't backed by some very powerful forces. And I believe the United States and, of course, NATO is all funding them. We know that for a fact, right? But this is really dangerous times because Russia, China, and Iran are all banding together. And we're seeing a lot of escalation here. I personally don't think China is in a position to do as much as they say they're going to do. but very dicey times, I'll just say that. And the astrology mirrors it. That's what I'm saying. So between now and the middle of July, we're going to see, I think, a lot of really dangerous things coming to light here. Particularly, I'd mentioned that Mars is going to conjunct Alcyon, which is a very actually, I should say Uranus. Uranus is going to be sweeping over a lot of fixed stars in the Pleiades, but particularly Alcyon is going to come in. And what I have to say about that one is that's dangerous. It's really, really dangerous. That's also been known as, by some astrologers, the central star. And, there's a lot of black holes and things connected to this. This is a very, very powerful area. It's called the Pleiades. And I've been mentioning this a lot on previous podcasts. And one of the things that we're also going to see, not only do we have Uranus doing that, but we also have Mars going to a conjunction of the moon's south node known as K2. And that one's dangerous. When does that happen? It's probably going to happen right in the area. I wrote it down here. It looks like it's going to be, again, right around the 20th, give or take, of July. So here we sit at the 8th of June, and things are heating up in a lot of ways. And this kind of brings me to the topic of today's podcast. One of the things that's been brought to my attention is this new golden dome, if you will, that Trump is putting up. And many people have said, yeah, but wait a minute, that could be actually used not only for protection, but surveillance. And I mentioned in my last podcast last week, we've got a real problem because AI now has access to all this data on everyone. And, it brings me to mind the screenplay writer, Philip K. Dick, who was a very interesting guy. He was a mystic. He actually predicted his own death. And of course, he wrote just a few movies like Minority Report. He wrote Blade Runner, and he also wrote Total Recall. And again, we hear a lot about this stuff. In fact, here, I'll play a quickie car wash clip. I think everyone will remember this one. This again was 1927. And what's interesting about that, it was kind of a fear-mongering in some ways of modern society and the mechanisms that were coming in. Well, tell you what, that was the Industrial Revolution. And as I have been mentioning, in astrology, we had the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction, which happens every 20 years, except it's not quite that simple. When it happens in certain configurations where it joins in what we call new elements, earth, air, fire, and water, extremely powerful. And of course, the great conjunctions are when they happen in Aries. Well, we had what we call a mutation conjunction happen in Aquarius right on the winter solstice of 2020. Excuse me. And what it had indicated to me was a high-tech revolution like we have never seen. And what are we seeing right now? This is exactly what's happening. We're even seeing old nuclear power plants like 3 Mile Island being reignited or retooled and going to come back online. Why? So they can power the AI. You see, it's just AI, AI, AI. It's all we hear about now is AI. So where I'm going with all this is, here we are as human beings. We kind of feel like, fish in a barrel, or if you will, flies in a jar. And we're actually setting this up. And again, this is, if you put your sights in the future of 20 years from now, let's not look at the Trump administration. Let's just say, okay, where does this all go? 10, even 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, you're going to find that this computerization and AI is going to become infiltrated into everything. In fact, many people are likening this golden dome to a potential Skynet scenario like we saw in Terminator, right? Especially Terminator 2 and the later ones. So clearly, we are building systems that are actually self-destructive if they're not kept in alignment. And where's the astrology go with this? Well, I mean, right now we're seeing a lot of push and pull in the world. And I a lot of people have been saying, what looks like in the future is going to be any major triggers. Well, we certainly have a Saturn Pluto square coming in 2028. And you could say the pot is kind of simmering right now up until that point. And we have other trigger points, but this is a huge one. And again, some of the things I'll rattle off right now is, next week on the 11th, we actually have a full moon. This is a very powerful full moon. Because of the nakshatras it's in. And full moons always kind of bring things to a crescendo, if you will, every month. It happens every 2 weeks, obviously. And I can tell you what I'm seeing here is a lot of very dangerous situations. Again, we've got Israel, Iran with this whole nuclear situation with Iran getting a bomb, which they probably already have. And you've got the Russia-Ukraine thing. Russia's not just going to roll over. Yes, they've reattacked, but this is, going to be an interesting scenario where this all ends up. The question is, will we end up in World War III? I kind of get no. Sorry, my light ear's doing something weird. I'm always getting technical stuff here. But anyhow, the bottom line is where I see we're ending up with this is it's probably the dust is going to start to settle a lot as we get into this fall. And hopefully we won't be in any real major conflicts. I don't get that the symbolism is there to allow us to actually get into a World War III scenario. Nobody would win. Nobody would win. But, that is going to become something that's going to loom on the horizon much, much more in the future. So it's really, something that we got to keep our eye on. This AI is going to be a little Pandora's box that I think is going to grow into a really big one as time goes on. So where I'm going with all this is how do we keep sane? I mean, when you think about what is mechanistic society doing to consciousness, in a lot of ways, it kind of drives people crazy. And I think it always has. I mean, when you think back, I remember my grandmother telling me, the Model T is coming around, on the farm. This is like in the late teens, early 20s. And, people had all this fear the world was going to end. And, to that credit, look at World War I, look at World War II, and all the other wars that have been happening and are continuing to happen. So, the world has always been stuck on spin cycle in an insanity place. But I like to come back to who are we? If we can keep centered by whatever method we can do so, whether it is something connected with, going in nature, I don't care what you do, you go for walks or whatever it is that keeps you centered. That is such a critical element because otherwise we lose our marbles. And when you think about it, all the medications in the world cannot change the rationality that we're all imbued with. And I always talk about the conscious mind is kind of an attenuator. It's interesting. I ran into a guy that I want to have on here on a podcast down the line, and it's Anthony Peake. Anthony Peake has written some really interesting books on consciousness, and he and I just locked right in when we started talking. And again, that's what I love about Vedic astrology. And when I do readings, I'm always looking into, the conscious awareness of that individual on the ladder of karma. And, I'm really, in a lot of ways, very blessed to do all these readings because I'm always seeing these karmic Gordian knots that we all have. And this is where I always like to come back to is we have to remember we're spiritual beings having a physical experience. We're not our possessions. We're not our bodies. That camera will come right back on. And again, we always notice here that if we don't keep that awareness, that conscious awareness, we're going to probably lose our marbles at some point in time. And what I have found with astrology that's very interesting is the shifts and cycles that we all go through. Again, my son has been going through a lot of stuff, and he's in a K2 dosha. And when I look at the lunar mansions and I look at all the effects that are going on, plus he's in Sadhisate, and, I have a lot of clients that have similar situations, and I notice it in my own life. It's really a guiding light in some ways if you use it appropriately. Again, I always look at the analogy of driving a car. If you're really ultra aware of your surroundings, you're likely to have a much better trip wherever you're going, right? If you're on the phone, screwing around, and not paying acute attention to everything that's coming at you, and again, that's a good analogy, taking care of our health. It's like checking your tires, right? Changing your oil, paying attention to things in your vehicle that may not be right, which is kind of what I would analogize to the physical vehicle. There's nothing more important than health. And I always mention reflexology. I mean, you can do whatever you got to do with doctors, but I love reflexology because it allows us to begin to study where we have blockages in the hands and feet. And I put those diagrams up a lot, and I show those a lot in readings because I think it's such a critical thing to young and old people. And it often really improves our whole flow of the chi flow in the body. Because when you really look at it, that's what we are. We're a biological, genetic vessel that our consciousness is rooted in. And it's interesting because Yogananda, Paramahansa Yogananda, Sri Yukteswar, and so many others, all these different religions all talked about this veil that we're under. And again, I always love to use this diagram. Let me see if I can actually fire that up. I'll just put it on the screen really quickly. I'm going to share my entire screen here. There we go. So this will get weird for a minute, and then I'll show it to you. So this diagram, is one that I use a lot. And this one I like because it shows what we call the chakras. You can see the crown chakra is Mars. The Jupiter chakra is where the third eye chakra is. And when you think about that, we see with our eyes, but the third eye chakra might just be an antenna to our consciousness. And it may be one area where the silver cord really comes through in consciousness. There's not a scientist drawing breath that can tell us how consciousness really gets into the gray matter of the brain. They certainly know a lot about the brain waves, and all the different states that we're in during the day and night when we sleep. But how can out-of-body experiences, or NDE, near-death experiences, astral travel, or more importantly, when we exit the body known as death, how can consciousness exist? Well, that's an interesting topic because it certainly does, in my opinion, and the evidence is overwhelming throughout history. And the third eye chakra is connected to the pineal and the pituitary gland. And again, I've talked to so many doctors to say, well, they're all calcified. Well, I wonder why. They're putting fluoride in the water. They're spraying the skies and the food and everything else. So this is really interesting because what's interesting about reflexology is it helps open up these chakras. And of course, many people are familiar with yoga and various different techniques to open up these chakras. And isn't it interesting that the root chakra is Saturn? And Saturn always is the planet they say rules karma. And again, us Westerners, we get a little bit queasy when we hear about that word karma, right? Because I always say the earth is a time machine. And I'm really blown away the more I get into astrology that the ancients knew that each day, which of course for us is sunrise, noon, sunset, and midnight, is our day. Well, this is astronomy. When you think about it, the earth is a time machine that we get rooted into these physical genetic bodies. Quite profound stuff. And I have to say, one of the problems I think that is so hard for all of us is keeping rooted in this world of insanity. I mean, especially young people today, they're constantly on a screen. It's all I see is their thumbs, their thumbs going back and forth on the screen, which is fine. There is advantages to that. They're exposed to about 100,000 times more information than many people were, including myself, prior to that. I mean, most people, will realize that, hey, prior to the I would actually say the early 2000s, the smartphone really didn't come in strongly until about 2010 to 2015 is when it really started getting, in there. But clearly, we are now in a transition. And again, I love playing that clip from Metropolis because that was kind of a scare tactic, if you will, or an awakening of the mechanistic society. And now we're entering a place where Minority Report and all these other things are really a reality. And this whole thing that we're seeing with the Golden Dome and all these other things that are happening are actually in the future tools that could be used if they're not very carefully regulated. I mean, just like we heard, the Pfizer reports and all this other stuff. Oh yeah, we won't spy on you. Of course they can. In fact, I've heard that they have profiles built on every single one of us. All these conversations on telephones can be recorded, but more than that, they can be analyzed in a deep psychological profile. Now, that's good from a terrorist standpoint. We definitely don't want people killing other people and terrorism. And it's a wonderful thing that we have these detection devices where the FBI or the CIA or whoever else it is can stop and thwart horrible things from happening. But I'm leapfrogging forward to this stuff can actually be reversed and used against society. And it's kind of where China is right now. And again, the new one world order has not gone away. It's just being pushed back a little bit right now. And I only bring all this up because I'm hearing so many reports about people now saying, oh, is Trump part of the other thing? I don't want to get into Trump and politics and all this stuff. But what I do want to focus on, and the one power that we all have, is our consciousness. If we can keep the lower conscious mind, which I always talk about, is known as the nefesh. I'll put that back up here. This diagram I use an awful lot. I really like this diagram because what it centers on is who we are. And if you look at this diagram, I use this an awful lot. I got to just page through here to find it. Yeah, this is one. And this diagram I like a lot because, again, you could see this big thick dashed line is kind of the division between what modern psychologists or psychiatrists, and I'm talking modern in the last 150, 200 years, would call the so-called conscious mind below, and the so-called subconscious mind is above. Well, notice right here, Saturn. Saturn is the cross over the crescent of the moon. What does that mean? Previously concretized energies, karmas, and you could say realities coming into time and space. What's even more interesting is, I mention this a lot, the Greeks used to call Saturn, well, they still do, Chronos, which is the keeper of time. There's many different analogies to that. But if you look at this, I mention this a lot. You and I are emotional beings or spiritual beings having a physical experience. We take logic and we emotionalize it, no matter how rational we try and be. I mean, look at Trump and Musk right now and other things. People get emotional. And no matter how much we try and act logical, we always have emotion. And this is where Vedic astrology is so interesting. And one of the things I look for in readings all the time is, where is Saturn and the moon? Because the moon is our emotional perception of reality. And it really is. In fact, one of the things that's most telling is that they say the lower conscious mind forms when we draw. Well, it might start in the womb, but they say from first breath forward, that's when the lower conscious mind actually begins to form. And of course, we see that. Anyone who's raised a child, you can see it. In the first year, they go from literally flailing arms and can't talk and can barely see when they're first born, to now standing up and beginning to really realize the modern world. That's why kids are so precious. I mean, when you see how impressionable we all are from the ages of birth to like 7 years old, I would actually say even up to like 5 years old, it's absolutely stunning. And the lower conscious mind is in the Aramaic and Hebrew referred to as the nefesh. That's a strange word that simply means the lower interfaced consciousness. It's not us. It is what we developed in order to stay in this lower dense time-space continuum we call Earth. And quantum physicists talk about this a lot. In fact, another really interesting thing is talking about the simulation theory. Many, many people have referred to this over time. What's the simulation theory? Well, interesting how the more we get into modern technology and AI and all this other stuff, and of course, what can be created with it, you begin to question what is reality. When you really stop and think about it. In fact, some of these young people who are so immersed in these games, that literally becomes like a pseudo reality. And I think in some ways, even though the Earth is very real, I mean, drop a brick on your foot, and call me on the first of the month. We're certainly not in a what I would call simulation digitally, but we are insofar as our lives. And this is what all the great spiritual teachers have talked about: is keeping centered. We get so wrapped up in the daily humdrum of life and the physical maintenances of the body and our bills and our taxes and everything else, and life can get crazy. So what's interesting is where I wanted to go with this is the more we can find a way to, like the Stoics said, just be in the world, but not of it, we might find more centered happiness. It's our reaction is everything. It is our total reaction is what really equals, I think, sanity versus, going off the rails, So I'm going to take a look at a couple of comments here. I can't stay too much longer. Today has to be another quick one, but I'm doing my weekly update every Wednesday, and then we'll get more and more into some podcasts and guests here coming up on the weekends. But I'm just looking here. So a lot of comments here that people are saying true energy is not fake, just system governed. Yeah. I mean, when you look at systems of government, this has always been the whole elements of existing on Earth. When you go back, I don't care if you go from the jungle to the kingdoms to where we are now, we're always giving power over or living in systems. This is why a lot of people often try and escape from Alcatraz, if you will, or a society and its regulations and systems, and live off the Earth. And this is why this goes right back to good and evil. Well, I believe there is destruction. And throughout literally all what we would call time, there's always been destruction. Look at the Tartarian stuff, free energy, all this stuff, and it gets destroyed, the mud floods. What forces are causing this? Very interesting, because the demonic forces are very real, but so are the angelic. And I think the more we can stay in a place of just kind of, observing and reacting with more of a stoic, and that's easy to say because I can go through my stuff too. We all do. But at least it gives us a healthier viewpoint, because so many people become so reactive. I mean, look at these riots and everything. And, a lot of people are very upset about what's going on. And, we're in some dicey times in this world. I mean, look at war. My grandfather was born in 1900, right at 18 years old. He was born in January. So he ended up getting drafted into World War I. He never ended up going in, but I remember seeing the gas masks and the pointed hair, hats and everything that the World War I stuff had in the attic. And, it's interesting. And of course, many of us have parents or relatives who were in the Vietnam War, and, World War II is getting pretty old now. Vietnam is starting to fade too. And so is the Korean War. But I mean, look at all these modern wars and these poor people. I always say George Carlin was right. War is when old men in business suits send young people off to war for the business interests. But the problem is, once it gets going and people do attack, you do have to protect your country. So military is sadly very necessary. And if we didn't have it, we would probably all be singing different languages and tunes right now. But anyways, money has always been the key here. And we are in transitional states like I have never seen before. And I think as the future comes in, we're going to see our conscious awareness and being able to center is going to be, I think, more important than ever before, because all your modern movies always have some bleak outlook, you know. But I would say there was a guy named Rizwan Virk. He wrote the simulation hypothesis. And again, this is nothing new. I mean, look at, I always like the old guys too. This is, you know, of course, Carl Jung, who wrote Synchronicity. And, you know, we're always trying to unravel the rationality of what's going on in our lives. And one thing I have to say, I have found eerily accurate the astrological cycles. And what it does is it centers you at least to say, okay, this is what's happening to me now. And you can get maybe the more deeper spiritual lessons out of those transits and progressions, because we're all going to have them. Earth is a time machine. It really, really is. So I'm going to take a look at a couple of comments here and see if we can't go off on something on that. So anyways, so somebody's asking me, what is the astrology show for President of the United States 47? Will he leave his position in March 2026? You know, that's a good one. I haven't looked at that. You know, that would take a lot to have him stay on. I don't know. I haven't heard 2026. You know, the election would be in 2028, but you know, there's a lot of rumblings that Trump was going to try and run for a third term. They would have to negate the 220 election and call it fraudulent. And I think for something like that to happen, we'll look into that down the line. I can't get into that right now, but I can tell you that one of the things I see here going on is a lot of stuff coming up with Pan Bondi, Cash Patel. I think this Doge is going to be a wave of prosecutions that are going to be happening as this year goes on. This is going to be a really wild year. We've got the Iran, you know, Israel thing that's got to resolve. We've got the Ukraine-Russia war that's got to resolve. And more importantly, I think we've got a lot of stuff that's going to come unfolded here in the United States of what's been happening. Because you got to remember, this whole Doge thing just exposed a lot of the money. Now they got to figure out where it went. And according to the astrology, it shows that is going to really come on the radar screen as we get into fall. So, and again, we'll be talking a lot about this on other podcasts. And as far as Trump carrying on, I can tell you, Trump is really, he's in a powerful cycle right now. He's had Jupiter in his 10th house right when he won the election, which was a shoo-in, I thought, especially up against anyone he was running against. And then now it's in his 11th house. And Mars just crossed his ascendant. And notice how much more conflict is going on and what he's have to deal with. Again, all this stuff in the world stage, as well as Musk and other things, the bill and all this tax stuff going on. So this is a really intense time for Trump right now. And boy, they'd like to take him out. I know that. He's really got to watch poisoning. He has some difficult aspects, but he's come through them. And, you know, there's all kinds of conspiracy theories about Butler and everything else. So this is going to be an interesting year as Mars goes over this K2 this July. So, anyways, yeah, we'll look into Trump. I actually want to do a detailed analysis on Trump. Maybe we could pull his chart and look at that next Wednesday, because a lot of people are asking here about Trump and what's happening. And I know a lot of people love him, a lot of people hate him, and I don't want to get into the politics, but I can tell you what the astrology says, and that's some pretty cool stuff. But anyways, I probably have to go here because I have another appointment at 10, and I'll start preparing in the future. I've been really busy with clients and taking care of stuff here. But by maybe next week, we'll put together a longer podcast. And I'll be back Wednesday morning. I'm going to be doing these Wednesday morning updates at 9 Pacific time, which is Pacific Daylight Time, obviously. So in the meantime, hang in there until next week. And again, right now, we got this full moon coming up next week, and which is very powerful. And watch the world stage. It's going to get crazy. and this whole ICE thing. I think they're going to put that to bed pretty quick, because if Trump pulls in the National Guard, which he's doing, and also the Marines, it'll get quashed quickly. But it's going to create a lot of backlash. So, you know, time will tell. I don't see that one the main problem. I see the main problem coming up on the world stage. Let's hope that all resolves itself. So anyway, thanks everybody for joining me for this real short one, and I'll see you Wednesday morning, and we'll have some fun there. Take care and have a great rest of your weekend, and we'll see you Wednesday.